What's going on, everyone, and welcome into another episode of Expected Bets for your go-to podcast for all things hockey betting. I'm joined today, as always, by my two co-hosts, Gretzky Betsy's and Franco the Banker. Betsky, it feels like every episode you just kind of dive into the NHL closet and pull out a random hat, shirt, maybe a bracelet next episode. Right? Who knows what you got? But
that's
I like it.
Old vintage Pittsburgh hat I got a couple years ago.
Yeah, I like it.
Bust it out.
Yeah, Franco, we're going to stay in state here after we just talked about your Philadelphia Flyers. Both are pretty interesting teams this season.
Yeah, I do not have any Pittsburgh gear, so that's I think that's a given. But this is a weird team, man. I don't know. We'll see. This is on that cusp of that aging core and what they can do with it still.
Yeah, how much do they love their captain? We'll find out this season. It feels like
2 more years.
It feels like a reality show, like a dating show in Pittsburgh. But
2 more years worth of love.
Exactly. Yeah, 2 years of love featuring Sidney Crosby and Malkin and Letang can hang out next to him and help him pick his dream teammate. So,
yeah.
All right, getting into the Pittsburgh Penguins team breakdown. Let's get into this Pittsburgh Penguins squad here. Sidney Crosby just a few days ago re-signed for 2 years, average per year 8.7. It's few additions this offseason, actually a lot. Kevin Hayes, Anthony Beauvillier, Blake Lizotte, Grzelcyk, McGroarty, Glass, to name a few. Sebastian Aho, not that Sebastian Aho. You got to specify that these days, but Betsky, repping the gear. I'll throw it to you first. What are your thoughts on the offseason additions this team has made?
Yeah, I mean, it's shuffling the chairs around and seeing if you get a little bit more chemistry out of the players you do have. But, last year on paper, this team looked a lot better with Guentzel on it, and you kind of replaced him with Bunting, which he had some chemistry with, I think he was playing with Crosby when Guentzel left, right? Yeah, I mean, his shots was a good little prop for the end of the season, same as his point. Good little player, but obviously not anywhere near the same skill level as Guentzel. And look up and down the lineup, and yeah, it's nothing too exciting. Maybe it's one of those things that Crosby and Malkin and Carlson and Letang can have a really, really solid year together, but that's really what you're hoping to see if this team's going to actually be able to make the playoffs or anything. It'll be interesting to see if last year was the down year or if last year was the beginning of a trend that was going to continue until Crosby and Malkin and the band are off the team.
Yeah, right. They're kind of in that weird stage right now where there still feels like they think their window's still open, right, in terms of kind of making a push. But Malkin, Crosby, yeah.
And I get it because you went out and you got Erik Karlsson last year, and things didn't go quite.
And
2 years ago they re-signed everybody, right?
Yeah.
Or no? Yes,
2
seasons ago. It was the season they missed the playoffs. It was kind of when people are wondering if Malkin would come back and whatnot. If I remember correctly, I'll have to look it up. But regardless, they kept the band together. All the rumors of Crosby potentially getting traded to Colorado during deadlines clearly aren't going to happen. At least probably not this year.
There's a weird rumor next, too, right? Because you just figured it was Colorado because his link to McKinnon.
Yeah, the Nova Scotia thing.
Yeah. I feel like they never had legs.
And Colorado's desperate need for a 2C.
Yeah.
But
Casey Middlestat. There you go.
Yeah.
Solution.
Yeah. We'll get to that. But yeah, I mean, I think personally it's probably going to be a lot of the same, but you have 4 players on this team who can make magic happen and are extremely elite. And then you have still a decent enough supporting cast. Brian Rust is still a hell of a 2-way player. Rickard Rakell seems to be slowing down a little bit, but he's a decent top 9. Bunting's nice. You added Rutger McGroarty, who we don't know what that potential looks like, but that's a big young power forward that they got from Winnipeg. who could bring a lot of skill and maybe some piss and vinegar to this team. I mean, the blue line, I think the Aho ad was a nice little ad to add a little bit of toughness and a little bit of grit and a little bit of responsibility in the back end when you got Letang and Carlson there kind of flying around. And, Carlson's only 2 seasons removed from a 100-point season, Norris winning season. So it seemed like near the end of the season last year, he was kind of figuring out his new home. And if he's still got a lot of juice left, you never know. But there's a lot of question marks of if this team can be better than last year. And I think there's a lot less question marks of if they're going to be about the same or start to get worse.
Yeah, that third pairing on their defense of Grzelcyk and Aho, I don't hate personally, right? Like when you look at this full core of their 6 defensemen, it's not terrible by any means. Obviously, a little bit on the older side when you're looking at it, but pretty solid. Carlson, Letang can still move the puck here, so I think this is more on the forward group than defensive group, I guess, in terms of their ceiling this year.
Or a net.
Or
yeah, well, that timeout. That's a whole separate section of the test that we haven't gotten to yet. Franco, they don't lose a lot of guys here. Jeff Carter retires. Riley Smith was their big departure from Pittsburgh this season. But what are your thoughts on? We'll start with the departures, then moving along to this team.
Yeah, losing Riley Smith. I know he had a down year last year, but I think he was he's still a good player. And now you're losing him. I don't really care for the ads that they've put in place to replace him. Like who's the direct, 1-for-1 is what I like to kind of look for. It's like it's not Beauvillier, it's not Lizotte. Sure as hell isn't Kevin Hayes. Kevin Hayes is the replacement for Jeff Carter, I guess you would say, right? Cody Glass, I don't know. So that's where I'm kind of a little bit worried. I mean, the wing depth still looks all right overall, but I don't know. Like left wing looks really weak to me with, Connor, Bunting, McGrody, and Lizotte. I don't know what we're going to get out of that group. And at times last year, it felt like it was like the only way this team was going to score goals was because of Crosby just willing it to happen. And eventually Father Time is going to come. I don't know if it's going to be this year or next year. I mean, this guy is insane when you look at his like year to year just being right up there with everyone else, even though he's 10 years older than everybody else that's up at the top as far as points and stuff. So again, how long can he do it, especially when he's the only one carrying the team? It's kind of worrisome if you're a Pittsburgh fan. But yeah, I don't really love that they lost Riley Smith and don't have like a direct replacement for him. It just, I don't know. I don't really care for Cody Glass that much, to be honest with you. I feel like he hasn't really shown much. So
yeah, now getting to that goaltending room here, Jari and Nedeljkovic they were average last year. It's kind of how you put it, right? They both had above 900 save percentage. The league average was .903, and they each had respectively .902 and .903, right? That's on paper. Watching them, clearly it kind of felt like a different story, right? Betsky, you mentioned this before, but yeah, this goaltending room's another area of concern. If Jari, after the promise he showed early on, doesn't kind of return to that form.
Yeah, and I would say one of the scarier things here is I thought Jari actually played all right, and to the point where he was playing pretty good through parts of the season. And the way his career has been, he's been so up and down, though, that if that was his good season and we get the Hyde this year and of his Jekyll and Hyde, and or I guess it'd be the Jekyll. I don't, whichever way you want to take it, but it could be really ugly if he can't even be just at that level he was at last season. They have a bad goaltending mix. If he can improve of that, okay, now you're talking about a team that can maybe be slugging out for a last playoff spot. But I feel like that's a tall order.
Yeah. I would say so. And you have Nedeljkovic back there, who was great his rookie season,
Yeah.
and then hasn't really kind of returned to form either. So that's to be interesting. Franco, do you have any thoughts on this goaltender room?
Yeah, I think, like you said, it was more the eye test that you saw from this tandem where there were good games, but there were these like really bad blow up games from them, and
Yeah.
that does not bode well for what this team is going into the season, because you don't really have an answer if that happens again.
They do have Joel Blomqvist, who is a prospect in their goaltender room from Wilkes-Barre Scranton in the AHL. So I guess that's always kind of their push in case of emergency button that they have. But yeah, and Franco, you talked about this with Philly too, right? You mentioned that despite how bad Philly's power play was, that you're like, well, maybe we were better than Pittsburgh, and that wasn't the case. But Pittsburgh power play has struggled as well the past few seasons, and they have tons of talent too, right? It's not like Philly where you're kind of putting pieces into play here. Like these are superstars, obviously getting older, but they should still have a pretty good power play.
Yeah, you would think with a guy like Crosby on the ice being able to, find passing lanes and create space, that this power play would be one of the best. And then you have Carlson on the blue line. It's like, how is this a bad power play? It never made sense to me last year. They should be like worst case middle of the pack. You would think, not like it was to the point where it was like a negative if they would get a power play. Like I remember betting them a few times, and it was a 1-1 game or whatever, and you're like, come on, like they're driving the play. You're like, okay, I think we're gonna take this lead now. And there's a tripping in the offensive zone, and they get the power play, and it like completely killed the momentum for them. And then they would like immediately let up a goal, like 2 minutes later after the power play ended, and you're like, this is just how is it this bad? It never made sense to me. I hope whoever the power play coach was is gone, because it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. All right. Before we get into the best and worst case scenario for the Pittsburgh Penguins, I'd like to talk to you about our sponsor, BetterHelp. This episode of Expected Bets 4 is brought to you by BetterHelp. Have you ever stopped to think about something new you'd love to learn? As adults, we don't always make the time to learn we used to when we were kids. Kids are constantly exploring and growing, but somewhere along the way, life gets busy and we lose some of that curiosity. What's something you've been wanting to dive into? Maybe it's cooking, picking up a new language, or even figure out your golf game to finally beat your new friend. Just because we're older doesn't mean we have to stop growing. In fact, therapy can help you reconnect with that sense of wonder. It reminds you that your back to school moment can happen at any time. Therapy is not just for people who have gone through something major. It's for anyone looking to be the best version of themselves. Therapy can help you learn positive ways to cope with stress, set healthy boundaries, and tackle challenges with more confidence. It's really about giving yourself the tools to thrive and grow, no matter what stage of life you're in. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist, and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/THPN today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/THPN. Now back to the show. Looking at the best and worst case scenario for the Pittsburgh Penguins, the best case, Betsky feels like playoffs, right? Like they sneak in there, obviously, but they're not going to be kind of the contender that we feel like, at least. Like maybe they have a surprise season, right? But given everything that we've talked about, you have your New Jersey, New York as kind of your top two contenders there. Maybe middle, like two to be Carolina, right? After that. And then it's an interesting mix of teams, whether you put the Islanders in there, the Penguins, maybe the Capitals, now that they've kind of improved, of maybe fighting for that last playoff spot. So it feels like they should be in the mix. But again, they're not favored. They're not like, it's not minus money for them to make the playoffs,
Yeah. Yeah. So I think actually last season we talked about this, and I was like, man, if they sneak in, they could make some noise. just because maybe it takes a little bit of time for them all to click. But it's Crosby, Malkin, Eric Carlson, and Letang, and at the time Gensel, all back in the playoffs together. Like, it's kind of a scary thing, especially if they got handed kind of a younger team. Like, I think the whole scenario is like if they played the Jersey Devils last year, and not with what happened with Jersey. Let's say Jersey was healthy. Wouldn't it surprise me for them to be able to get past somebody in the first round, or like could they beat Toronto in the first round if everything went right, just because of their sheer experience there? Doesn't feel the same this year. I think if they sneak into the playoffs, it's probably going to be a round one exit unless something changes with their goaltending. I think sneaking into the playoffs is really your best case scenario here, and with a round one exit, I just can't see them getting through any of these other teams anymore. Or I guess maybe best case scenario is Crosby puts up another insane season where he gets 40 plus goals, and Eric Carlson puts up a ton of points, and it's a really fun team to watch, and they're kind of in the thick of it for a while, but ultimately they don't make it. I don't know. Those are kind of where I'm leaning.
Yeah, we could talk about some team props in a little bit here. Franco Betsky kind of segued us into this worst case scenario where it feels like this aging core continued kind of disappoints, and we kind of see Sidney Crosby just slowly phase out of the league, which is sad to say too, right? Because he's been such a staple in the NHL for the past, 10, 15 years.
Yeah, I mean, it would be sad to see him go out like that. I think Malkin seems to be breaking down a little bit more so. He's kind of had more injury issues. He didn't really have that good of a year. I he still had like 60 something points, which isn't like terrible, but
no, but it's not.
That's not
honestly. I think I think he has taken the biggest step back, and I think that's why, like, when you look at their actual roster on paper, it still looks pretty good. But you got to take out Malkin's not.
He's not the guy from 5 years ago where he's like that big power forward that can skate pretty damn well. Like, he's kind of slowed up a little bit, and yeah, I think that is the thing. I think, like I said, putting Crosby, putting the team on his back is like it's gonna reach a point where it's too much. If no one else can help him out, if Malkin can't help shoulder the load a little bit this year, I think that's what you're looking at as your worst case scenario. Like, I think this is a fringe team as far as being in the playoffs. I tend to think they're going to be on the outside looking in, but regardless, I think it could get worse if it's one of those situations where Crosby's trying to do too much and maybe he gets injured, or something happens where he just can't keep up his production level because he's trying so freaking hard, because he's just the ultimate gamer, and he's proving it time and time again, even being like 40 years old.
Yeah, I mean, this front office clearly feels like this window isn't closed, right? Because the Gensel addition at the trade deadline last year, they're still adding pieces in the offseason to try to build around this aging core. But again, they've been on the wrong side of the playoffs the past two years, the past two seasons here. And you wonder what's, if anything, is going to be kind of that X factor that gets them over the hump, whether it's the goaltending, whether it's kind of additional offensive support. This defensive group kind of rounds together. But overall, yeah, it feels like things have gone wrong the past two seasons. And based on everything we've said, the additions aren't going to be their solution that kind of gets them into the playoffs and opens up this or continues the Stanley Cup window, if you could even say that, So
yeah, we're not even counting Gensel as a subtraction or departure from this team because it happened last year, but like that might be the most significant one of all. I mean, you lose that guy on that top line wing, and you sure as hell have not replaced his production.
Yeah. All right, before we get into some team and player futures, I'd like to talk to you about our sponsor, DraftKings. TD, Tutty, taking it to the house. Whatever you call a touchdown, they matter more at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Ready to place your first NFL bet? Try betting on something simple like a player to score a touchdown. The NFL season is back in full swing, and who doesn't love rooting for a touchdown? So be sure to check out the latest odds at DraftKings Sportsbook. Ready to do a touchdown dance of your own? Score big with DraftKings Sportsbook, the #1 place to bet touchdowns. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code THPN. That's code THPN for new customers to get $250 in bonus bets when you bet just $5 and get 1 month of NFL Plus Premium. Only at DraftKings. The crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, 21 and over. Age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in New Hampshire, Oregon, and Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/ftball. NFL Plus Premium offer available only to new and former NFL Plus subscribers. Additional NFL Plus Premium terms at nfl.com/terms.
Getting into the Pittsburgh Penguins team and player prop futures market. Betsky, this is your bread and butter here right now, right? Regular season points total at 90.5, plus 120 to make the playoffs. It's like a soundboard at this point, right? Like we just need you to hit the button and say, if you're going to take the over on the 90.5,
you might as well take the playoffs.
Yes, exactly. Yep. We got to get that soundboard there. But I completely agree here, right? If you're expecting some success out of this team this year, and while it may not be the craziest story, it is a little bit unlikely for them to kind of return to the playoffs, given how stacked this Atlantic division is and kind of how those first two spots in the Metro are already pretty much filled out. Unless something weird goes wrong for maybe the Rangers or the Devils. We've seen it happen in the past. But bearing any of that, it seems like they're going to be battling for potentially a playoff spot. And if they do hit that 91, 92 points, regular season points total, feels like they're going to get in, you know?
Yep. So. Agreed. So really, I wouldn't want to touch it, though. I mean, I would probably lean more on the under 90.5 here, but not this. This is a team with this may be one of the most confusing teams of the range of outcomes of just making or missing or that point total, even because
we just talked about the Islanders too, right?
I know.
Like it's similar.
I have more confidence in the Islanders, but in the end of the day, it wouldn't be shocking if Carlson has a phenomenal year, Crosby has a phenomenal year, maybe Malkin had a nagging injury and he goes back to being a 75-point player, and this team is playing well, and Jari has a rebound and beats my expectations of having him do flip-flops every other year, and then he actually has 2 decent to very good seasons in a row. But that's a lot to hope for. So I think ultimately under 90.5 would be my most confident bet on these options here.
Yeah, we mentioned it before, but last year you kind of laid out a pretty good point of, instead of taking them to win the division, kind of look more towards the conference and Stanley Cup odds, given their experience in the postseason. This year, it's not the case. You're going for kind of like the under at 90.5. Franco,
Yeah, and really, like, when you saw Crosby at the end of the season, I mean, he was a man on a mission to get his team in the playoffs one last time, and that was exactly what I meant, because if he puts them on his shoulders and he can carry that team through and play like one of the best players in the entire world, and some of the other talent on that team caught up, you never know what could happen, but this year just doesn't feel like that can happen.
Yeah, and maybe Brian Rust stays healthy too and can kind of contribute offensively. He had 56 points last year. He's almost a point per game player. So
yeah,
it's another possibility as well. Franco, are you kind of leaning more towards the under for the Penguins, or are you taking more of a positive approach in terms of the betting style?
Yeah, I think under here. Obviously, I lean them to not make the playoffs just because of how I feel about the other teams in this division in general. I think I like the Islanders a little bit better than them, even though that seems crazy to say. And there's still that potential that 5 teams from the Atlantic make it. If that happens, there's no way in hell this team's making the playoffs. So I think probably, I guess I would go under that 90.5 if you had to pin me to something here because I'm not trying to lay minus 150 on them to miss the playoffs. But I think if they miss the playoffs, it's kind of the inverse of what Betsy said. If they miss the playoffs, they will likely be under the 90.5, and that's the better value here at minus 115 than the minus 150. So that's probably where I go. I think when it really comes down to it, this is a team I'm probably going to bet overs on. Like I think that they still have the goal scoring ability, and I think they have the questions in that I think this might be a team you actually enjoy watching, but I don't think at the end of the season they're going to be a good team when all's said and done.
Yeah, no, I mean the Penguins have been kind of an exciting team to watch the past few seasons, obviously just given the star power that they've had. Moving along here to the player points and player goals props here, DraftKings offers 3 players from the Penguins for points. Brian Rust at 58.5, Malkin at 64.5, and Crosby at 90.5 for points. In terms of goals, Rust is at 25.5, Malkin at 24.5, and Crosby at 33.5. I mentioned Rust before. Obviously was out for 20 games last year, but still put up 56 points through 62 games here. If he stays healthy, it feels like that 58.5 market is a pretty good bet. He is still playing on their top line with O'Connor and Crosby if everything stands now. So that's where I would lean in terms of a player prop. Crosby at 90.5 is also intriguing given he just signed an extension. He's going to want to push this team before Betsy. Like you said, he was unbelievable the last 2 weeks of the season. So those would be kind of where I lean, but I'll start with you, Franco. Any looks in the player points or player goals market?
So I think I'm going to kind of look more towards unders here because, again, I think that I just think there's a reason for a little bit of pessimism for this team. So I'm probably going to look at Malkin under 64.5. That was about where he was last year. I don't have the numbers up exactly in front of me. And I think as crazy
67.
as it might sound, yeah. So like if he continues to decline or miss more games, like, I don't know, we'll see. That one I'm more on the fence about. I think I'm going to go under on Crosby here because I know this is crazy because, we know who he is and we know what he is, but he played 82 games the last 2 seasons, right? Typically, historically, that has not been the case with Sidney Crosby. He's had concussion issues historically. The years prior to that, he hadn't played 4 straight seasons where he hadn't played 82 games. So if he misses any games, you're talking 90 points or 91 points is right at the cusp of where he's going to be at. He finished with 94 last year, 93 the year prior. Those were 2 82-game seasons. If he misses any games, you're going under here. So I'm not rooting for an injury or anything like that. I as a Flyers fan, I actually like Sidney Crosby. I think he's a hell of a player. I really do. I wish he was on my team. But it's just the reality of it. He's getting up there in age. If this team starts to have issues down the line as well, where they are looking like a team that's not going to be making the cup or making the playoffs, he could miss games just because of small nagging injuries or limit ice times just to keep him fresh for next season. Like there's a bunch of realities that could play out to the staying under as opposed to staying over, whereas that you're looking at like a perfect 82-game season where he continues doing what he's done.
So I want to bring up something you said before. You were saying this team, you're looking at to kind of bet overs for this team, right? But you're looking at Crosby, Malkin under points. Is this more so, I guess, a two-parter of injury issues have been a thing in the past, right? So that's something you're considering. But is it also kind of a more so, not so fade on the offense, but more so on the goaltending? Or kind of what was your, or like, where is,
So I would say the offensive production is coming from the big guys, clearly. So if I'm betting them, it's going to be game to game overs. But obviously, if Crosby's out in a game, I'm not betting an over unless it's for the other team, right? But again, you still have the bad goaltending, or what we're expecting to be subpar goaltending in that, right? So they should concede a lot of goals. I think they're going to be on the losing end more than the winning end in general. So I can see just high-scoring games. I think that's what it's going to be. Now, there's going to be games probably where Crosby's going to put up a ton of points, and that bet may be horrifying. But like I said, at the end of the season, I I think it's really you're going to be really hard pressed to see Sidney Crosby play 82 games. It might just be 79, but that's enough to make it hard for him to get to that number, I think.
Yeah. Just want to clarify that. Betsky, any points or goal props that you're looking at for the Penguins?
No, I'm in complete agreement. It's all too tight. It's all players that are older and injury prone, and I'm just not willing to put the risk in for any of this.
I thought maybe the Magic Hat would speak some sort of prop into your head there and form it, or nothing. No luck.
No luck.
No luck. All right. Looking at the trophy market for the Penguins here, nothing jumps out for me by any means here.
There's one.
One. Do you want me to? Can I guess?
Go for it. See, take a guess.
McGroarty at 30 to 1.
Yeah.
Yep. McGroarty 30 to 1 to win the Calder here. He's on that. He's in the top 6 mix with this forward group.
If he's playing, if he takes over Gensel's spot, watch out, and can excel at it, obviously. But I mean, if they, it's interesting because this is a brand new GM or second year GM. Kyle Dubas from Toronto. He's finding a way to slowly bring in guys he likes, like Bunting and whatnot. And
Jari.
You can, yes, Jari. Yep. And he's also playing the balancing act of keeping a team that can make some noise with Crosby's last kind of sunset years here. So I think if the writing's on the wall, though, he's going to want to give these kids chances. So, I mean, it wouldn't shock me if Rutger gets put in the top 6 immediately. And if he clicks with Crosby, holy cow. Yeah, I mean, if he takes over Jake Gensel's spot and again, can excel at it or just live up to the hype, I mean, you could be talking about a 60-point rookie here.
Yeah, we may have like 10 bets in the Calder when we finish this up.
There's a lot of interesting,
right?
Just throw them all in.
Yeah, we'll switch to a Calder podcast of just every week, just kind of update the odds boards here.
So this would be one to keep your eye out during training camp. So to me, him and Cutter Gauthier are similar but different players. They're both more on that power forward side. Gauthier has a lot more upside, obviously. But he's also playing on a much worse team, surrounded by the Ducks are up and coming, obviously, but he's not getting injected into maybe playing next to Sidney Crosby. No other rookie is getting put into these situations that Rutger is. So if this trophy has historically always been about points too, outside of the few times defensemen win it, and those years are generally because there aren't many forwards to give it to. So if Rutger has one more point than Mishkov, it won't matter. I mean, to a lot of people's votes, they will just strictly vote on the kid who had the most points.
Yeah, we've seen it with the Norris.
It does seem like the narrative's been changing a little bit because we brought it up in the Islanders episode with kind of the older Russian factor or Bunting being an older player. There does get to be some kind of poo-pooing when those players are so much older than the rest of the class. But man, I didn't realize that this was an option, or I didn't really think it all the way through until we started doing this episode. And that may be one that I need to sprinkle in a little bit.
We'll have to check your betting news for the 10-page Calder article coming out.
Gosh,
soon. So
I wrote one earlier, and it was Mishkov, Celebrini, and Stankoven were my 3 favorites. And now that we've been doing this, I still really like Mishkov. I think that's the most safe, quote unquote, safe bet on this award. And then you can hedge it a little bit, because again, you're going to be getting 3 to 4 times the payout of what you're putting in if you do a full unit. So you can take a little risk here to sprinkle on some of these better ones. And if the 30 to 1 for Rutger is really, really interesting as one of those sprinkles.
Yeah, you can make your case, obviously, for about 10 to 15 players, right, who have a chance to win the Calder this year. It's just absolutely unbelievable. Franco, did you have any thoughts on McGrory or any other kind of trophies that you're looking at?
I think that's a great argument because we were just talking about how the left wing depth just looks absolutely horrendous, right? Like Drew O'Connor on the top line just is not shouldn't be speaking to anyone, right? Maybe it is bunting up there, but if they give him a shot, I mean, we saw the production of Gensel, and obviously Gensel's a hell of a player. I'm not trying to discount him, but just being able to play with Crosby is not going to be fair. So if he gets a shot relatively early, yeah, I think I would be very interested in that market just because the points are just going to kind of flow if he's staying next to Sidney Crosby.
Yeah, agreed. All right, before we wrap up here, Betsky, any closing thoughts on this team?
No, I deep down, I think I know this is a team that's going to be sunsetting, and I hope with Crosby only doing 2 years, it would be, as much as I'd like to see him kind of retire as a Pittsburgh Penguin for his entire career, it would be kind of fun to see him maybe take that dive to Colorado or a team that's looking for a second center to really make another big push. But it kind of feels like the end of an era here, and it's kind of crazy to think that between Crosby and Ovechkin here, Ovechkin may have, I mean, they're both just phenomenal players, but in the end of the day, Ovechkin may set one of the toughest records we've ever seen set by a player. And it's going to be interesting to see how history is written in 10, 15 more years down the road. I mean, I don't think anybody can doubt that Crosby is one of the best players we've ever seen. He has, 4 cups or 3? They won 2 in a row. 3? Okay.
3.
But
if Ovechkin beats
Gretzky's goal record plus he's won a cup, it's crazy. Because before the Stanley Cup win, there's no doubt in your mind that Crosby's going to always be looked at as the top of those two. Then the several years after, the Capitals just never kind of regained that like magic they had for that cup win. But now you're seeing Ovechkin getting this close to saying the goal record, and it's like, wow.
And it's interesting too, the narratives, right, of each of those players, right? Because Crosby is viewed as more of a leader and overall playmaker. Like not so much as his goal scoring ability, but his playmaking ability and his leadership. Whereas Ovechkin is like just an absolute offensive weapon. Not so much known for his leadership qualities, even though he's been there for how long? And
he
clearly
almost always leads top 10 in hits every year.
Exactly. I don't think I think his leadership ability is kind of underlooked.
Me too.
And kind of devalued. So.
I think McDavid has started to make Crosby look less impressive.
You could say that. You could make everyone.
Yeah, but
I definitely agree. But now you don't often have two players like that playing at the same time, and we've had 5 years now of it.
But do you think McDavid's going to win 3 cups?
Different team, sure.
Oh man, that's crazy.
No, yeah, that's an interesting point too. Because what if he never wins it? What if Jack
I think it's
Eichel
crazy
has
the
more
amount
cups
of points.
than McDavid?
The amount of points that Crosby was putting up in a time when it felt like goal scoring and point production was just so down in the NHL.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to consider that too.
That's true.
It felt like there was no big time goal scores for that stretch there, and now it's kind of returned to form a little bit the last couple of years. But yeah, I mean, Crosby and Ovechkin were doing it when no one else really was, so that's just adds points to their impressiveness.
Yeah, and Crosby's been the face of this league for how many years now, right? And Ovechkin's just feels like he just flies under the radar. Obviously, Crosby's kind of a better people-facing person in terms of a person, personality-wise, but Ovechkin still seems to be kind of coming around too in terms of all the social media stuff and kind of getting more fan interaction as well. So it'll be interesting to see. Ovechkin's not going to break the record this year, but next year is when it's going to get really interesting to see kind of if he still stays in that form and if they.
Yep.
So. Yeah, we'll see. All right. Well, we want to thank everyone for listening to this episode of Expected Bets 4. Be sure to hit that subscribe button on YouTube so you never miss an episode. We've got tons of great content coming your way. continuing to roll out our individual team previews. Check us out on social media, on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube as well. Thank you again to our wonderful sponsors, BetterHelp and DraftKings. We appreciate everyone for listening, and we'll talk to you guys soon.